Well, we're speaking here today with Mr. Proinsias de Rossa, MEP for the Dublin constituency. Proinsias, thanks very much for agreeing to speak as part of Politics Talk.
Glad to.
Proinsias, I would just start by asking you to outline your achievements from your previous term in the Parliament. Many Irish citizens obviously would ask, what are our parliamentarians doing on our behalf? And I suppose I'd be very interested just to hear you outline some of those achievements from your previous term before turning to your current one.
I suppose there's always a tendency for politicians to claim they have sort of saved the world in the last 5 years in order to get elected for the next 5 years. Sure. I tend not to do that because the European Parliament is very much built on consensus. It's if you don't work as a team in this place, you get nothing done. So while I would claim credit for having influenced the decision, for instance, on the Services Directive, which in fact will now be coming into effect at the end of this year, even though it was approved 3 or 4 years ago by the European Parliament, I can't say that it was all my own work because there are over 700 MEPs here. Everybody has a say in what goes into every piece of legislation. But certainly I would be most pleased with the outcome we had on the Services Directive, where we ensured that there was no race to the bottom as a result of the right of companies across Europe to provide services in any other part of Europe. So that was an important step forward, I believe. I think the new Progress programme on social cohesion and inclusion was also an important development, and I think the work we did towards the end of the term on the climate change issue in the Parliament, again in which many Irish MEPs and many MEPs from all over Europe made a contribution, where we set the agenda for the Commission and the Council going into the conference next week. Sure. Because we were conscious of the fact that this had to be prepared well in advance. So we made our decision well in advance, almost a year ago now, outlining what we felt the Copenhagen summit should decide on.
And I suppose Copenhagen then has come up as a real priority and is likely to spill over into next year in some other shape or form, whether it's another summit or whatever variety. But I suppose looking forward then, from your own perspective, what are your priorities going forward for the remainder of your new term? Obviously, we're waiting for the introduction of a new commission and its policy agenda on all the different policy areas. But your own priorities going forward will be what exactly?
Well, I don't think any of us can escape the fact that we're in the depths of a recession, an economic crisis, an employment crisis, and of course, because we're having this summit next week because we're facing a climate change crisis, and all of these things have to be taken into account in the policies and legislation that we bring forward over the next 4 to 5 years. And it seems to me certainly that one of the priorities has to be on financial regulation, try and ensure that at a European level all banks comply with regulations which ensure that they are safe and secure and can lend to business so that we can maintain jobs. The other, of course, is we must put in place European measures to assist in the development of smart jobs, as indeed is the emphasis at home in Ireland. But we can't do that on our own. We have to ensure that there is sufficient investment in research and development, but also in product innovation. I mean, we can put money fine into research and development, but unless that is producing products which are being sold on the world market, then there's not a lot of point. Sure. So that also has to be a priority. I suppose, given that I'm a member of the Employment Committee and have been for the last 10 years, ensuring that there is sufficient investment in education and training across the European Union, including in Ireland, particularly now when so many people are losing on their jobs, we need to ensure that those who are on part-time, those who have lost full-time jobs are kept in the loop, are trained, retrained, and that they don't fall out of the system, because it's extremely hard to get back into work if you've been out of work for a year or more. So that those would be the kind of priorities at the social and the economic level. there is a further issue that I'm currently president of the European Parliament's delegation to the Palestinian Authority, and that's an important priority for me as well. The whole issue of the Middle East peace process and how we can assist at the European level to unblock the impasse that is there at the moment.
I suppose then I would just turn to the issue of low turnout in Irish European parliamentary elections. It's obviously not unique to Ireland, this particular problem. And are there any kind of steps which you think ought to be taken, or particular reforms to drive up participation on the part of citizens when it comes to voting in these European parliamentary elections?
Well, without being complacent, I have to say that Ireland is not the worst performer in terms of turnout, probably because we traditionally tie our European elections with local elections. A lot of member states resist doing that, and as a consequence have much lower turnouts than we do in Ireland. That's not to say that we shouldn't be a lot higher. I think the people vote in elections to elect people who are going to make decisions which affect their lives. The more they recognise the importance of those decisions, the more likely they are to vote. And I think that we probably have failed so far to sufficiently convince people that the European Parliament is important enough to come out and vote.
And I suppose along the lines of this connection that we need to make, I'm drawn to the fact that the Lisbon Treaty was marketed, perhaps overly so, as a very democratising treaty. There were certain mechanisms which are highlighted which were going to democratise the Union ostensibly. Of those instruments and mechanisms, which would you identify as having the most potential, I suppose?
Well, as a practicing member of the European Parliament, clearly I would be of the view that the increased role that the European Parliament will have in amending proposals that come from the Council and the Commission as the most important. We will now have virtual, at an extreme level, the right to veto legislation covering 95% of what would become law in the European level. In those areas where we currently have the say in the nature of legislation, something close to 80% of the amendments that we approve become part of European law. So not very many people are conscious of that. If you compare that with the national parliaments, where in Ireland less than 1% of amendments are ever taken on board by the government of the day, whoever they may be. I think it's very clear that the European Parliament has a lot of clout in terms of the kind of legislation that comes eventually down the line, affecting the quality of the water that people drink, the quality of the air, the safety of the cars that are on our roads, and so on. All of these things ultimately have an effect on the quality of people's lives.
And then I suppose turning to Ireland's clout, whatever about the European Parliaments, do you think that our historic scepticism, I suppose, given our rejection of Lisbon I and previous to that obviously Nice I, do you think that it has undermined Irish parliamentarians' voice here in Brussels and in Strasbourg? And is the fact that there are no Irish parliamentarians as chairpersons of any of the parliamentary committees or as chairpersons of any of the political groups, is that an indication of a loss of influence on the part of Irish parliamentarians?
I don't necessarily think so, and I have to say, I have great respect for Irish people's sort of questioning of Europe and indeed of their politicians, both nationally and locally and at the European level. The essence of democracy is an accountable executive, and I think that's extremely important to keep us all on our toes. I think the question of the positions that MEPs have in the Parliament obviously important. As I've already said, I'm currently president of the European Parliament's delegation to the Palestinian Authority. It wasn't easy to get that position. There are only 3 Irish Labour MEPs in the Socialist group, which has over 180 MEPs. So, to extract a position like that, where there's something like less than 30 committees that you can get a chair of, is difficult. So, it's not I wouldn't sort of berate other Irish MEPs for not having got those kind of positions. But the influence that MEPs have is in their committees, in their political groups. If they are diligent in attending their political groups, speaking on the issues that are of concern to them and to Irish citizens, participating in the committee debates in the Parliament, again on the issues that are of concern, and finding consensus decisions by negotiating constantly on a daily basis with our colleagues in other political groups. That's where the influence lies. As I've often said, the difference between being in the Dáil and being in the European Parliament is that in the Dáil you make a row every day. In the European Parliament you have to make an agreement every day.
Well, Francesca, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your term.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.